Curious, does anyone actually enjoy watching nature shows like Shark Week? Okay, yeah, a few Shark Week, Planet Earth, Prehistoric Planet. Some of them are really hard to watch because the animal kingdom is very brutal. I'll give you just two examples. The praying mantis. Yep, there he is, or she, or both. If you were a praying mantis, it would be socially acceptable to devour your mate. Female praying mantises are famous for what's known as sexual cannibalism. Welcome to Eden Church. Biting off the male's head and eating him during or after mating, because the male's body has lots of protein, right? That makes sense. The other is the panda. If a panda has twins, it is normal to abandon or neglect one of them to take care of another because they do not have enough energy to raise two cubs simultaneously. Please do not get anything in your mind for that. That sounds harsh, but why? Why does that hit us on like an emotional level? Well, logically speaking, if humans did any of these things, we would call it wrong, unfair, and unjust, right? But the problem is we do devour and neglect one another. For my other job, I work for a nonprofit in the city that serves victims of human trafficking. Charlotte consistently ranks in the top 10 of U.S. cities for human trafficking. Every year, we're helping anywhere from 30 to 50 victims escaping their trafficker. It truly feels like we are pulling them out of the depths of hell. And the shared experience among them all, they felt like they were nothing more than an object to be used, to be devoured and consumed. Last week, we saw how over a quarter of households in the greater Charlotte area are cost burdened, meaning they spend more than 30% of their pre-tax income on housing costs. So they are having to spend so much on housing, they have to make sacrifices with other living expenses. For example, a modest 2-bedroom rental home in Charlotte, you would have to earn $35 an hour, well over minimum wage. You would have to work 164 hours a week and almost 4 full-time jobs. That leaves thousands of homes at risk of eviction, displacement, or homelessness. If you were born in poverty, we talked about this last week, or just a specific zip code in Charlotte that is economically disadvantaged, out of 50 cities polled, Charlotte ranks dead last in upward mobility, meaning it is almost impossible for you to get out of poverty. Charlotte is full of praying mantises and pandas. We live in a city where there is active oppression like trafficking, or perpetuating systemic injustice that keep people oppressed, or we display a passive indifference towards the oppressed in forms of neglect by not making other people's problems our own. I'm curious how you would complete this sentence. The Son of Man came, ... In the scriptures, there's 3 ways that the gospel writers complete this sentence. The Son of Man came, number 1, to seek and save the lost. The Son of Man came to serve and to give his life as a ransom. And the Son of Man came eating and drinking. He came to bear witness. He came to serve. He came to set a table. We're in the beginning of a several-month conversation around 2 practices from our shared way of life. We organized our church around 9 rhythms and practices that truly embody the life of Jesus. And up for the next several months is 2 of them, witness and service. This is where our formation turns outward, where we become like Jesus for the sake of others. And before we get into like how to witness, how to serve, we need the why. We need to grasp a robust biblical vision for these practices. So for today, I want to just walk through the scriptures together. Is that okay? With an eye on the themes of justice and evangelism. And just heads up, I try really hard to make these 25 minutes. That's not going to be the case today. Don't worry, there is food for you after, okay? Whenever we take a theme and we explore it through the whole Bible, it feels laborious. I get it. But if we do not get the why for these practices, then the how-tos will feel pretty unnecessary. And I hold to a worldview and a conviction that the Bible is not just some ancient story. I'm convinced this story gives us clues into the questions that we are all asking, like, who are we? Why are we here? What on earth is wrong with the world, and is there any hope? So there may be times you'll feel totally lost in this journey. That's okay, to help you along the way, so that you know where we are anchored. And I want to frame the whole Bible into 6 movements, and I'm just going to give them to you right up front, okay? No guessing. Number 1 is creation and the royal task. Number 2 is the fallout. Number 3, God's covenant relationship with Israel. Number 4, Jesus in the kingdom. Number 5, the spreading of the kingdom. And then number 6, the end, which is the return of the king. Let's start with page 1. Deep breath, okay? Inhale through the nose. Exhale. We ready to go? Okay, I'll just talk to myself. So, creation and the royal task. This is the first 2 chapters of Genesis 1 and 2. Page 1 shows us a God who, in his desire to share his life and love with others, confronts chaos and creates a wonderfully ordered world full of beauty and potential. He then appoints humans to oversee this world and to create new communities. Genesis 1:27, God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. So right off the bat, page 1, we see dignity, we see equality, we see that we are set apart from all creatures as the image of God. They are to represent God and rule the world by his definition of what is good and evil. And the opening story offers this ideal vocation for humans. We are to take this good world and to develop all its potential while living in harmony with God and each other. This is the identity of the Bible's view of justice. All humans are equal before God, and they have the right to be treated with dignity and fairness no matter who you are. How's that working? Well, movement 2, the fallout. Genesis 3 through Genesis 11. As humans go about the tasks they've been given, they're faced with choices about what's good and evil. Will they trust God's wisdom, or will they seize autonomy and define that for themselves? And here a mysterious, dark character enters the story, a rebel spiritual being. It represents evil at its source. It entices humans to doubt God's generosity. And this leads to disaster. There's rebellion on earth. There's rebellion in the heavens. Humanity's relationship with God is fractured. Their relationship with themselves is fractured. Their relationship with the earth is fractured. And though this is an ancient story, it is a very personal one as well. The sin of the first humans feels familiar. We are constantly redefining good and evil to our own advantage at the expense of others, are we not? Self-preservation. I mean, the weaker someone is, the easier it is to take advantage of them. And so the Bible is really clear. We see this happening on a personal level, but also in families, communities, and entire civilizations that create injustice, especially towards the vulnerable. And when humans redefine good and evil in Genesis 3, they assert their rights above the rights of other humans. And now we seek resources in the well-being of ourselves and our own community to the disadvantage of others. Does that sound familiar? You see, Genesis 3 through 11, it offers a fundamental, multifaceted portrait of injustice. Genesis 3, I just mentioned, they redefine good and evil, and they take this knowledge for themselves, and that leads to all sorts of things. For one, there's gender inequality, and the patriarchy comes out of that. Genesis 4, Cain does good in his own eyes, and it leads to jealousy and murder, which spreads to even more evil. Genesis 6, the humans are so corrupt, there's ecological injustice, there's environmental injustice. It says the land is corrupted. There's also these like rebel spiritual beings that begin teaching and colluding with the humans to perpetuate injustice. Genesis 11, you have cities that are created. That's where the idea of Babylon comes. The rise of cities and nations where pride and violence and injustice multiply rather than God's beauty. That is where we're at in Genesis 11. And it creates this tension between a just and generous God and the rebellious nations led by spiritual evil that have given into injustice. This is the entire plot conflict that drives the whole story of the Bible. So what does God do? Well, movement 3. God enters into a covenant with Israel. This is the rest of the entire Old Testament. God's response is set in motion a plan to restore blessing to the whole world. He has so much dignity and respect for his human creatures that he gives them over to what they want. He gives them over to their free choice to be ruled by other gods, not God himself. And God will choose one family from among the nations, the people of Abraham, who are later known as Israel. And he chooses this family as a vehicle through which they would live differently than the other nations. Genesis 12 through 50 is, again, the family of Abraham is chosen to become like a counter Babylon. They're called to bless the nations, Genesis 12. Genesis 15, they are called to, quote, do right by Yahweh through their faith. Genesis 18, they are called to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. Funny enough, that's the first time those words appear in the Bible, is Genesis 18. So justice in the scriptures, it is the Hebrew word for mishpat. Can you say that? I've got like 30 of those today, so just lock in, all right? Mishpat refers to the actions that we take to create a community of justice so that all people are treated fairly. In the scriptures, there's 2 kinds of justice. There is retributive justice. So think like punishment reward. If I stole $5, I have to pay back $5. If you accused me of stealing $5 and I didn't, I wouldn't have to pay. And in fact, I would be repaid for the trouble of being accused. That's retributive justice. But the other is restorative justice. This is the kind of justice that makes sure that everyone in the community is treated fairly and given what they are due. It's about granting people rights by changing even unjust law or practice. So restorative justice is about liberating the oppressed, while retributive justice is about confronting evil. Israel was to be about justice, but also righteousness. What the heck does that mean, okay? It is a very Christian-y word. Maybe you've heard it said before. Righteousness, or Hebrew, the Hebrew for it is tzedakah. Go ahead, can you say that? Very good. It is doing, like very simply, righteousness means doing right by someone. It is the standard of right relationship between people, and it is closely linked with this idea of mishpat. So tzedakah is an ethical standard of right relationship. I like what Alec Motyer says, that it's being both right with God and therefore committed to putting right all other relationships in our life, to, quote, do right by someone. Tzedakah is the standard of right relationship, and mishpat, listen, is the action you take to get that standard. And a lot of times those 2 words are put together, meaning like the hope of the prophets was that a king would reign with tzedakah umishpat, righteousness and justice. Psalm 89, righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne, God. Love and faithfulness go before you. So righteousness and justice, or tzedakah umishpat, is something always demanded of those in the scriptures who have resources, who have influence. They are to act with righteousness and justice on behalf of those who have neither. So Abraham, you and your family, you are to be about justice and righteousness. Genesis 18, the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Since Abraham will become a great and mighty nation, in him all nations of the earth will be blessed. I've chosen him so that he can command his children, his household, to keep the way of the Lord by doing," here we go, "righteousness, justice." We okay? We tracking? Okay. Here's where it gets really interesting. If you keep reading that passage, like the very next verse, you get the infamous story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Genesis 18, the Lord said, "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, their sin so grievous, I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me." So these two cities, whether you have cracked open a Bible before or not, they have a reputation to them, do they not? It's usually like sexual perversity. And that is a part of the story, but listen, I think we fixate on that and we totally miss the point. That has been magnified, even weaponized, but look at what is actually revealed in the story. The English word outcry in this text is the Hebrew word, here we go, tzedakah. Can you say that? Does that sound familiar? It sounds a lot like our word for righteousness, tzedakah, does it not? Tzedakah means cry of the distressed. It is the same word used in Genesis 4 when Abel is murdered by his brother Cain. "Listen, your brother's blood, tzedakah, cries out to me from the ground." It's the same word that when the Israelites are oppressed by Egypt that comes out in Exodus 2. And where Sodom may be infamous for sexual perversion, the cry that reaches God's ear was injustice. Ezekiel 16, "Now this is the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy." That is so interesting. And the word for detestable, it means idolatry. Anybody in here not like practice idolatry? Yeah. Listen to me, I'm not downplaying the sin that is within Sodom. It is very much there, but the point and the cry that reaches God's ear is not all the things that they were doing, it was how they were neglecting others. The cry that reaches God's ear is injustice. Because when a community does not practice tzedakah, you get tzedakah. When a community does not practice righteousness, you get injustice. And like Genesis 4 and Genesis 6, where God responds in judgment through injustice, we also have that here with Sodom. Like the flood in Genesis 6, which was a decreation event, a decreation happens against Sodom. Just go and read that story. And it also happens to Egypt. Because as the story continues, we've got Abraham's family. They end up in Egypt enslaved for 400 years. And it says they cry out, that's our word, tzedakah, and Yahweh hears their cry and acts. Exodus 6, "I've heard the groaning of the sons of Israel. The Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I've remembered my covenant. So say to them, I am the Lord. I will bring you up from the burden of the Egyptians. I will deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you with great acts of," here it is, "justice." And so God does confront Egypt. They're known for their rasha, or their wickedness, or their, rasha also means guilty of injustice. Hold on to that word because we will come back to it. And Egypt gets absolutely mollywopped. That's my translation. They get decreated with plagues, with the Red Sea parting, and so on. What's really fascinating, though, is after Egypt is just taken apart, we have our other term, witness, show up in the story. The word there is ud, or aid. Can you say that? Either one. Ud, very good. Ud often means to bear witness or to share what someone has seen. So in this case, God is inviting the people of Israel to bear witness to him as a powerful king of the nations. When he enters into a relationship, so Exodus 19, he speaks to Moses and he appoints them to bear witness. Exodus 19, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings. I brought you to myself. Now then, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you will be my possession. For all the earth is mine, you shall be to me a kingdom of priests or representatives, a holy nation. So, interestingly enough, and I know we're in the weeds of biblical theology here, but just track with me. Witness here doesn't just mean that they share their experience, but it also means in how they represent them. Have you heard the commandment, you shall not take the Lord's name in vain? Anybody? This is not about cussing, okay? Dr. Carmen Imes, in her book, Bearing God's Name, she notes how there are 23 different ways to interpret that command. And in essence, it all means the same thing. The command is telling the Israelites not to misrepresent God. He put his name on them, and they are to carry it around like a banner. So let me pause. Israel's rescued. God chooses this nation to put the world back together, to defeat the rebel beings that are in charge of the nations, to draw the nations back to God. Israel plays a role in this because they would bear witness in what they said and how they lived. Preaching and demonstrating. They would bear witness through practicing justice and righteousness. Why is that important? If you have tuned me out, come back, okay? Not only is it unkind to preach the gospel without demonstrating the gospel, as I said last week, but biblically speaking, you actually are not witnessing if you neglect to practice justice and righteousness. And let me bring that just really close. You can know all the doctrine you want. You can say all the gospel presentations you want. You can tell people until you're blue in the face that Jesus died for their sins, but you are failing as a witness. In fact, you are not actually witnessing at all if you do not care for the poor and you do not do right by your neighbor. You're not evangelizing. You're not preaching the gospel. You're just saying words. Are we okay? So let me sum up the rest of the Old Testament to save us some time. The tragic irony of the Old Testament is that this redeemed people go on to commit the same acts of injustice against the vulnerable. So God sends the prophets to declare Israel guilty. Here is one of many rebukes, Ezekiel 5. The Lord condemns Jerusalem, stating that she has rebelled against my ordinances and greater wickedness. Here's our word, Rasha. Wait, hold on. Worse Rasha than Egypt? That's the same nation that was killing their babies and enslaving them for 400 years. Worse than them? That's what it says. It's worse because Israel actually knew better. They weren't operating out of ignorance to God like Egypt, but willful, premeditated disobedience against God. They began worshiping God, the other gods of the nations, leading to corruption and injustice. They were oppressing the poor, the foreigner, the widow. They were robbing people. They were doing child sacrifice to their gods. You name it, they were doing it. But sadly, history shows that when the oppressed gain power, they often become oppressors themselves. Israel, you failed to do justice, strike one. You failed to live righteously or right by God and others, strike two. And you failed to bear witness, strike three. And God leaves them. That's Ezekiel. God actually takes his presence from them and leaves. and they end up conquered and captive in a foreign land away from their own, away from the place that God promised to bless the world through them. It is a dark part of the Bible. But despite Israel's sin, their downfall, their exile, God does promise through the prophets to restore blessing to the world still through this family. Even Israel's rebellion would not stop him. Their hope was that after exile, God would return to live among his people. There would be a great leader to come to lead Israel in faithfulness to their God, because this leader would perfectly bring tzedakah u'mishpat, righteousness and justice, enter Jesus of Nazareth. Movement 4, who is sometimes called Emmanuel, meaning God with us. We find him bearing witness to and leading this new kingdom of tzedakah u'mishpat. Gavin just read this for us. And he stood up and read in the scroll of the prophet Isaiah, who was one of the main prophets to say, Israel, you have royally blown it, but there is someone else coming. And so Jesus stands up and he reads that the Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he's anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom to the prisoner, recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, to bear witness, to show how to do right by God and neighbor, to fight for the poor and the oppressed, and to bring justice. There's only 2 times in the Gospels that we have record of Jesus weeping. Do you know what they are? Well, one is over his BFF Lazarus. After Lazarus dies, it says Jesus weeps. That's an obvious one, right? But the second one is less obvious. As Jesus is coming into the city of Jerusalem, which was like the hub of Israel, this was their capital. He's coming in as their king. It says that he weeps over the city. Why? Well, later it's because he's weeping over their injustice. Because injustice makes a sound that God hears, remember? Tzedakah, the cry of the oppressed, rising to the heavens. The 4 Gospels in the New Testament present Jesus as this resolution to all conflict of the Old Testament. He claimed he was the very love of God become human. He claimed that he was going to be the kind of human that we were all made to be but failed to be. They claimed that Jesus was the faithful Israelite who would fulfill God's promise to return and extend divine blessing to all nations. And here's how he do it. As we've seen, humanity and Israel's embrace of evil has created a world of violence, injustice, and death. You don't have to look far to see that. You can totally disagree with everything I've been saying and still see we have created a mess out there. But Jesus was a man of compassionate power. He proclaimed he was bringing God's kingdom back over the earth, a kingdom of tzedakah u'mishpat, righteousness and justice. He would confront the tragic effects of evil. But his plan to defeat our evil and sin was to let it defeat him. He would die for both the sins of Israel and their neglect of justice and righteousness, and he would die for the world and our striving to redefine good and evil at the advantage and expense of others. But his resurrection from death sealed his victory over evil and death. The cross was his enthronement. He's the only human that's fully done right by God, and now he offers that as a gift to those, meaning death as a result of evil does not have the final say on anyone for what he called repent and believe, which is just a fancy way of saying rethink everything you think you know about who God is, who you are, what the good life is, and put your trust in Jesus to heal you, to save you, to free you and lead you to the life you ache for, because all of us, whether we follow Jesus or not, we need to be saved. and not just have our sins forgiven so we can go to heaven when we die. No, the deepest parts of you and me that have been wrecked by the cancer and virus that is human autonomy, that we have suffered ever since. But the good news of the kingdom is that through allegiance to Jesus and power of his Spirit, we can be transformed from the inside out. We can partner with him to put the world to rights, and we can usher in this kingdom that he has already brought to earth. And that's movement 5. The movement has started. His death and resurrection prove he was the only true righteous one, tzedakah, and that he could finally put the world to rights, mishpat. Through the Spirit, new life is bursting out. I know it looks terrible out there, but new life is bursting forth even now. Heaven is invading earth. The Spirit is creating new multi-ethnic communities where we eat together, worship together, challenge one another to follow his teachings, to practice his way. That's why we're doing this long series on what he did. Follower of Jesus, you are judged by the love of God and found righteous purely by grace. And as a result of this grace, you are called to pursue justice, which looks like putting others and their problems above your own. It means putting ourselves at the disadvantage for the well-being of the vulnerable and oppressed. I like what Bruce Walke says. The righteous are those who are willing to disadvantage themselves to the advantage of their community, but the wicked are those who disadvantage the community to advantage themselves. This is how we put the world to rights. This is how more of heaven invades earth. And this is how the final end, which is Revelation, when Jesus returns, that it's in a whole world set right. He will fully confront and deal with evil in all of its manifestations. He's on mission to get hell out of his good world and out of you. And he will make all things new, where we can finally recover what we were made for, to partner with him to carry the project forward. That's the story of the Bible. And it's an epic story. And it's a story for all of us. So why does sharing it freak us out? Why does evangelism give us the ick? Well, I'd argue the ick comes from a potent cocktail of the content being shared and the people who are sharing it, i.e., their lives do not match their message. If you have grown up in the shadow of evangelicalism, which I think is most of this room, the cry of the evangelical deconstruction movement is on the rampant hypocrisy of those who claim Christ but look nothing like him. And I'm convinced the reason for so much pain is a fundamental misunderstanding of the gospel of Jesus. What we have today is easy believism. Like, here's the bare minimum entrance requirements. Here's what you need to get to heaven and to get out of hell. You see, the church in the West has produced consumers of Jesus' merit rather than disciples of Jesus' way, which we saw last week is the greatest issue facing Charlotte, and there is a litany of problems. But the greatest issue is whether those who claim Christ will actually become disciples. I'll close with this. Here's John Mark Comer. Salvation for Jesus is not about getting you into heaven. It's about getting heaven into you. It's not about going up there, but heaven coming down here. It's not just about a transaction, but a transformation. It's not just about the transformation of an individual soul, but of entire societies. It's not just about what God wants to do for us, but in us. And it's not just about what happens when we die, but what happens if we actually lived. It's not just about going to church after you're saved, but it being baptized into the family of God, where God is your Father and other followers of Jesus, your brothers and sisters, your primary familial allegiance. See, evangelism feels icky because the gospel being shared is not actually good news. It's a transaction to make, and people are a project. But for Jesus, it is an announcement of a whole new world order to belong to, a whole new way of being human. It's giving the Spirit to consent to teach you how to be the kind of human you are intended to be. It's ones who do right by God and others, one who seek to partner with Him to bring justice and beauty. It's ones who believe the gospel is actually good news. It's ones who believe that if we shared it and lived it in a way that was dignifying and clear and profound. Like, what if we shared and lived the gospel in such a way that even if our friends didn't believe it, they walked away wishing that it was true? That's where we're headed over the next few months.